and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. We are coming to you on Monday. Today is September 2nd, and we're going to be diving into the past weekend of college football. Week 1, just about entirely in the books. We do have a little bit of remaining action tonight, but for the most part, college football is entirely underway, and we are going to be diving into some of the premier matchups from the weekend, starting with last night's game between the USC Trojans and the LSU Tigers, talking about two programs that have a lot to prove this upcoming season, and we'll be breaking down what they looked like last night. Additionally, one of the other headliner games of Texas A&M versus Notre Dame on Saturday night ended up being a defensive chess match, so we'll be breaking down that game as well. Was it so much on the defense, or are there concerns with the offenses of Notre Dame and Texas A&M? We'll be answering that question. We'll then be running across the country as well for all of the other notable results, such as Miami sort of putting the ACC on its back with a huge dominant win over Florida in the Swamp. Very impressive. Cannot say the same for the remainder of the ACC teams, though, including Clemson, who in the second half ended up getting steamrolled by the University of Georgia. So we'll talk about those games as well as some of the struggles of top Big Ten contenders early on. Oregon, Michigan, out to slow starts. Ohio State as well versus Akron ultimately ended up putting something like 59 points up on the board. So we'll talk about out of that group as well, whether or not there are any concerns to be had for what occurred over the weekend for those Big Ten teams. And then we are going to be evaluating the quarterback play of some of the first-time starters in the Power Four, the likes of Jackson Arnold with big expectations on his shoulders, of course, wearing that Oklahoma jersey, the likes of Nico Iamaleava, or talking about Dylan Raiola, or some of these other young quarterbacks that are going to be seen as the future of the sport, and whether or not they lived up to the expectations, at least given their week 1 play. And then we are going to cap off the show by talking about what questions remain in college football following week 1, talking about the ACC, like we mentioned earlier, the Notre Dame Texas A&M game, whether or not that was about good defense or bad offense, and a whole lot of other questions, including the quarterback controversy, regarding the national champions in Michigan. So a whole lot to dive into, but before we do so, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Here at the GSMC Podcast Network, we thrive off of the interaction with our fans. So if you have a thought, question, or anything that you would like to voice out, please be sure to use the comments section as we again try and make the show as interactive as possible. And if you would consider leaving a tip or donation, you can use the super chat button on YouTube, or you can go to the link that is streaming across the bottom ticker throughout the show. That is gsmcpodcast.net. Anything would be very greatly appreciated there. We're starting off the show by diving into last night's marquee matchup of the USC Trojans versus the LSU Tigers. And like we talked about, this is a matchup between two programs that sort of have a lot to prove this upcoming season. You see the numbers attached to their names. USC coming into this season ranked number 23, LSU number 13. At the end of the day, we know that those preseason AP poll numbers don't mean anything, but the fact of the matter is both of these teams have expectations, and they're sort of built in similar ways despite the differences in these two programs, considering the fact that they are each headed into year 3 with their current head coaches. For USC, of course, it is Lincoln Riley. For LSU, it is Brian Kelly. And these were two heavily sought after coaches that were previously at big time programs, and the idea was that they were going to be able to carry on the legacy of their current programs in USC and LSU respectively, it's been a bit of a mixed bag up to this point through the first 2 years, where Lincoln Riley, I think that he gets a lot of flack because of the fact that they haven't made the playoffs yet, haven't won the conference yet, even though the fact that, in 2022, during Lincoln Riley's first season, he faced a very good Utah team in the championship game that ultimately, if USC wins that, I think he gets a entirely different, amount of credit for what he's done at USC so far. Was not a very easy turnover from when he initially went there. Yes, you have Caleb Williams, but outside of that, not a ton of NFL talent. So Lincoln Riley, he's done all right for what he inherited, but he needs to take that next step up. As for Brian Kelly, I think that he was not quite as popular headed into this next tenure previously with Notre Dame, and they had a handful of disappointing big game losses that a lot of people criticized Kelly for. And for whatever it's worth now, after this game, the LSU Tigers are 0-3 under Kelly in the season opening game. So he obviously still has a lot to prove himself as well. But then you look a little bit deeper into the rosters, and both of these programs are replacing former Heisman winning quarterbacks, and both of them have really struggled on defense as of late. So those are the two main things that USC and LSU need to improve upon, is making sure they solidify that quarterback play and making strides on defense. Now, defensively, I thought both teams showed great promise in each of those categories. We'll start with the defense, but I thought that both teams, got sufficiently on the board by the end of this game. Ends up being a 27-20 ball game, but the over-under line headed into this was 67.5, so more than 20 points under what the projected total was, and that's because of the defenses stepping up in a real way, I thought. And I thought it was more about the good defense than bad offense. We're going to be getting into the quarterbacks shortly here, but the front sevens of both of these teams were very impressive to me. I thought that you really felt the innovation of the new defensive coordinators. Like I mentioned, programs facing a lot of pressure. USC ends up bringing in D'Anton Lynn, and LSU ends up bringing in Blake Baker to try and manufacture some new looks for these defenses and make the most out of it. And I thought both of them did a pretty good job last night. Specifically here in regards to USC, I thought that they did a really good job producing pressure up front, and then the secondary specifically was very impressive as well, where you look at that second level cornerbacks, and even, I'll group the linebackers into this, the way that they were just flying all over the field. This is a team that has been, hurt in the passing game a lot in years past, and LSU, they still had a very good game from a passing perspective as well. They ultimately finished with a total of, double checking here, but, over 300 pass yards. So it's not like they were entirely locked down, but they did a good job, all things considered, not making anything easy, forcing Nussmeier and the Tigers to put together strategic drives. I do think that they could have been a little bit better in the run game. I actually didn't even really realize it during my first watch of this game, that LSU's drives actually stalled through the air more than they did in the run. LSU ran the ball pretty well, all things considered, 117 yards on 4.5 yards per carry. So maybe an area that USC is going to have to beef up on, though. But speaking of beefing up, I thought it was very interesting as well that ESPN, they showed the graphic and with the pictures of some of USC's key defensive players from last year to this year, and explained the fact that USC behind the scenes was working with nutritionists and trying to build up the size of those defensive players, and as opposed to the usual in the current NIL era, building through the transfer portal and such, USC was actually able to, yes, they dipped into the transfer portal as well, and we saw, I thought, a very key performance as well from transfer Kamari Ramsey, who they took in the portal, and he was all over the place. I believe he led the Trojans in tackles in this game, so it's not like the transfer portal isn't a positive factor for USC, but doesn't all have to be through the portal. There are things you can do within your own program to take steps forward, and I thought that USC showed that a little bit, but obviously none of it would have been possible without the play of quarterback Miller Moss, who I thought was very impressive. Both Moss and Garrett Nussmeier making their second career starts, and Miller Moss, specifically focusing on him for a minute here, he was 27 of 36, 378 passing yards, 1 touchdown, 0 interceptions. I thought he was very impressive, especially so on the game-winning drive where he was throwing under pressure and just that pinpoint accuracy. We really saw the higher, the ceiling of it a little bit as well. Just the fact that he was making difficult throws. He was hitting receivers exactly where they needed to be. He ends up picking the majority of those much needed yards at the time through the air, made pretty quick work, and ultimately put them inside the red zone where they were able to finish the drive off with a touchdown run from Woody Marks. But, Miller Moss was the one who was getting it done on this drive, and I thought that that was just about as reliable of quarterback play as you could have gotten. The fact that it wasn't necessarily death by one wide receiver, 10 different players with a reception in this game, nobody with more than 5 catches for USC. So I thought that, again, Moss showed a lot of maturity almost to be able to entirely survey the field. I think that, yes, of course, there are going to be, accuracy things where you can take steps forward, but I don't think that he put the ball in harm's way. I thought that, again, you're playing an LSU secondary that maybe does have some question marks, but all in all, he was methodical. He put together these drives, and USC could have had more points as well, but I thought a couple times with the passing game, with the penalties and with the run game, they actually set themselves back a couple times, including when they were stopped in the red zone and had to settle for a field goal, and an illegal blindside block sort of almost killed their hopes. They still almost got there because Zachariah Branch, as we sort of move on here to talking about the receivers, Zachariah Branch continues to show how special of a talent he is. It is, still going to take a little bit of time for him to develop all of the route running, the releases, to be a dependable, wide receiver every down in the passing game. But, when they draw these plays up for him to get touches and they get him out in open space, he's special. He had the 40-something yard kick return as well. Branch is going to be an elite athlete for years to come, and he would be really interesting to see if he ends up emerging as a top weapon for Miller Moss. But this is a deep wide receiver room, even if we don't know exactly who the number one option is, where Kyron Hudson, he definitely made a name for himself last night with the couple of incredible catches that he had, the one in the first quarter and then the one on that game-winning drive where he makes the one-handed catch through the targeting contact as well, that sets them up for that easy touchdown run at the end. But you're looking at a lot of promise. I already mentioned Branch, Jacoby Lane, Deuce Robinson, another couple of sophomore talents that could be standouts for USC moving forward. I think that there's a lot of promise on the offensive side of the ball. The run game, again, wasn't great in this. I do want to credit LSU's defense, though, because that is a very talented front seven. Harold Perkins, by the way, led the Tigers in tackles. I just know how much production he can give you from a pass rushing standpoint that it's almost a little bit frustrating. watching him playing a little bit further back on that second level with the linebackers, but at the same time, if he gets results, he gets results. They sent him on a couple blitzes, so I guess that sort of is the perfect time to transition here into the LSU Tigers. We'll start here with the positives, starting with Garrett Nussmeier, 29 of 38, 304 pass yards, 2 touchdowns. He did have an interception on that final drive, but at that point, kind of an empty stat there where the game was already over at that point. I don't think this was Nussmeier getting outdueled. I thought he was also excellent. Now, that being said, LSU is most certainly going to have to score more than 20 points per game to continue to be competitive, but I thought that this was a nice reintroduction to Nussmeier, like we mentioned with Moss, also his second career start, and I thought he was really good. I thought he settled in pretty comfortably. Unlike USC, it seems like there's already a little bit of a more definitive hierarchy in terms of the wide receivers, where Kyron Lacy was everywhere for the LSU Tigers, especially so on that first drive. I think he had 4 receptions then alone, but he finishes with 7 catches, 94 yards, and a touchdown. I would also give some credit as well to Mason Taylor, who definitely seems like he could have a big impact on this season. The third-year tight end, another 7 catches for him as well. A little bit less yardage, 62, but was a little bit of a comfort valve, I thought, for Nussmeier when he needed it, especially when he was under pressure. So I thought there was a lot of positives from this LSU offense. Like I mentioned, they ran the ball pretty well. Additionally, John Emery, who they're hoping can have a big season for them, had a couple explosive runs. I thought that LSU could have committed to the running game a little bit more because they were having success and sort of turned away from it. But either way, I think a lot of positives for this offense moving forward. The main concern is with the defense, and that's been the case. And like I've been saying, I think that it's been a very positive step forward for the LSU defense, limiting the USC offense to 27 points, which I know isn't spectacular, but again, given the expectations for both of the respective units, that's pretty solid. But at the end of the game, when you're looking at the fact that it was a obvious passing down situation towards the end of that game with USC, they're dropping back to pass, and LSU just could not get the stops. They are going to have to take steps forward in that department, and I'm not sure what it is necessarily going to be for them. You see they're relying on some freshman talent as well at the backside of that secondary. PJ Woodland getting a good amount of playing time last night, the freshman cornerback. He was getting picked on a little bit, I thought, from Miller Moss, especially those couple plays down towards the red zone that helped set USC up for a score. They're capable of taking the next step forward, but I mean, ultimately, I think what it's going to take for LSU, given what they currently are on the roster, I think it's just going to be their offense needs to produce more for them, because I don't know if I have a ton of expectations in their defense leveling up even further. I think their front seven is going to continue to produce, but that back end is a little bit dicey for me, and I'm just not sure if they're ever going to fully be able to recover from it ever. I mean, more so this season, but ultimately, again, big win for USC. You saw the line started creeping up more and more in favor of USC throughout the week. I think that people were sort of overlooking, I should say, what USC's defense is capable of. Again, I thought that both teams, for the most part, answered some of those questions heading into them. Seems like both of them are going to be set at quarterback, that defenses are taking the next step. But that being said, there are some limitations with both of these rosters. USC, again, LSU runs the ball more. I think we could have seen them get exposed more. And then LSU's secondary, I think was also sort of put on display a little bit in a negative light. But let me know what your takeaways were from this game. But we are going to be moving on here and then diving into the next premier game from the weekend, and that was Saturday night's matchup of Texas A&M and Notre Dame. So we will be diving into that next, but first we are going to be taking a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient, hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the noose, if it's some moosey shit. A stupid myth, you choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we're going to be diving into the other key matchup from the weekend, and that was number 7 Notre Dame going on the road into College Station to spoil Mike Elko's first game as the head coach of Texas A&M. And this was definitely a good game if you are a fan of defense. If you are looking for offense, though, this was not your place to go to, because ultimately this was really a defensive chess match for the vast majority of the game, and it wasn't really until Notre Dame ultimately was able to wear out Texas A&M's defense in the run game that there was any sort of real separation in this matchup. Where diving into the keys of the game, like I mentioned, Notre Dame, it started out a little bit slow, especially considering the fact that it was very well documented on the broadcast, if you were able to tune in, that Notre Dame only had 6 combined starts from the entirety of their offensive line. Other than that, it's an entirely remade group in the front 5 for Notre Dame. So naturally, especially against a defense as talented as Texas A&M with that defensive front, this was going to be a very tough matchup for them. And ultimately, I thought that they started to show signs of flash towards the end of the first half, and they did a good job of carrying it into the second half, where ultimately Notre Dame finishes this game with 198 rush yards, averaging 5.8 yards per carry. And a massive part of that was the impact of Riley Leonard in this matchup, where Leonard could potentially be that missing piece for Notre Dame. In the past handful of years, it seems like they've really been struggling with consistency at the quarterback position. Last year, I was pretty high on the idea of Sam Hartman coming in and being able to take their offense to that next level. That never ended up being the case. And, you know, I think that through that idea was based off of the fact that maybe Sam Hartman can help Notre Dame to air it out a good amount more, and that they can develop the passing game. But really what it seems like that Riley Leonard is going to be able to give in addition to this offense is the fact that he is basically another threat in that backfield that already has Jeremiah Love and Jadarian Price. He can be another running option for them. And we'll see whether or not they are ultimately able to develop more of a deep passing game. That was one of the concerns of mine. But I don't think it's unrealistic to think that Notre Dame could eventually make that development once their offensive line has some more cohesion and starting experience, and once they can hold up a little bit more up front, once they can sort of figure out which receivers are going to be a prominent part of their 2024 offense, I think there are layers that can be built on. And then, all of this coming with at least the knowledge that Notre Dame's defense should continue to shine all year long. They are known to be one of the best defenses in the country, and that should be the case. They never really let Connor Wegman get comfortable in this game. And additionally, in the run game as well, first and second downs, I thought that Notre Dame did a pretty good job of, forcing A&M into third and longs, getting them a little bit more behind the sticks, and forcing Connor Wegman to make a play, which frankly he just did not really throughout this game. But I want to go a little bit deeper here into Riley Leonard. 18 of 30, just 158 passing yards, had an additional 63 yards on the ground. But ultimately, he kind of just did what he was asked to do in this game, which is at least a start. And to be fair, I'm sure the play calling was inherently a little bit more conservative, knowing that the offensive line wasn't going to be able to give you all day long in the backfield and that you're facing a very good defense. But I cannot understate. I thought that the game turned when Riley Leonard started getting involved in the run game. Some of the outside runs in particular, because if you're just running into the heart of that defense, you are going to have a very difficult time. But once they started incorporating the outside game a little bit more, Riley Leonard, again, there are some accuracy things, and we still don't know if he is capable of really adding that deep threat to the overall offense of Notre Dame. I know a lot of people are very high on Riley Leonard. I like Riley Leonard. I'm not, entirely sold on him as the answer that's finally going to get Notre Dame to true national championship contention. But he's been excellent when he has played in football games. And this wasn't even one of those excellent games. It was a grinded out sort of, rely on your defense. But I thought was so important and impactful about Riley Leonard and the overall run attack for Notre Dame is that they were able to eat up clock on some of these drives and get their defense some rest, get the opposing offense out of rhythm a little bit, and ultimately, again, I don't want to overstate how excellent Riley Leonard and how he looked like a potential NFL quarterback or anything like that, but he did his job in this game, and ultimately, it results in a win for Notre Dame, which is really all you can ask for, again, in one of these big stage moments that Notre Dame has struggled with in the past. Him being able to go in there, provide the stability they need. And again, I sort of look back to that game of Notre Dame last year that I don't want to spend too much time on here, but versus Ohio State. And at those moments, it just seemed like when the first read, the second read a little bit wasn't there for Sam Hartman, the play was just kind of a bust. Riley Leonard, I think, makes things just a lot more dynamic, gives them extra options. He's, I think, very smart as a runner. I think that all of those backs in the backfield as well are just very intelligent runners. And you saw especially the run from Love at the end of that game to be able to have a little, it was kind of a minimal hole, and ultimately he just bursts through that for the touchdown that sort of ended up being the dagger for them. It was really impressive to me throughout, and I think that if you're Notre Dame, it wasn't great offense, but you survived a very tough environment against a very tough defense. Now is when, Notre Dame, they have a much easier schedule ahead. They won't really be tested once again until November when they go against Florida State. They have a lot of time now to sort of settle themselves in. Maybe they'll have some semi-difficult games on the schedule. Some they're in Purdue, they're home against Louisville, some fine teams that should be good competition for them to help them continue to develop. But really, I mean, this is a Notre Dame team that should go into November undefeated. And for whatever it's worth as well, I've talked about how I struggle sometimes to get there with Notre Dame, but Notre Dame's probably going to make the playoffs no matter what, even if they did lose this game. And so for that reason, I'm kind of glad they won this, just for the sake of, ultimately when they do make the playoffs, they'll have at least one true resume win and have the chance to add a couple more if they take home Florida State and USC. So, we'll see with Notre Dame. As for Texas A&M, this was a bit of a disappointing loss. Now, again, everything I said about the incredible defense of A&M and that's a tough matchup, that still stands the same on the other side here, where Notre Dame is a very impressive defensive group, especially in the secondary, which is where we saw Connor Wegman really struggle in this game. 12 of 30, just 100 passing yards, 0 touchdowns, 2 pretty rough interceptions. And, what I would say to this is that I've never been on the Connor Wegman hype train, but this is a former number 1 quarterback recruit. Broke his leg last year after 4 games, so he's technically still a sophomore. If you believed in Connor Wegman prior to this game, I wouldn't be entirely abandoning ship. It was a poor performance from him. But again, all things considered, the run game wasn't getting anything done for Wegman. It was a lot of 3rd and longs. Wegman needs to be better 100%, but at the same time, he has plenty of room to grow. This is also coming off of an injury where he ended up breaking his leg, similar to Riley Leonard. So, a little bit of jitters. That game's out of the way. Have to continue to roll on here. And A&M, they are a program that has higher expectations this year with the introduction of Mike Elko as their new head coach. So there is definitely room to grow. There has to be a little bit of patience, but I think that ultimately I struggle more with, in terms of the conversation of, was this game good defense or bad offense? I think A&M was really good defensively, and that was a very tough matchup for Notre Dame. That I give A&M the credit for that, but I also think that Notre Dame has a lot of room that they can improve moving forward. Notre Dame's a good defense. I don't know if I have that same level of expectations in Connor Wegman. Again, I'm not on the total belief train at this moment. I don't think you should be hopping off board if you already were on that, because this is a very difficult situation. First game of the season, coming off of the broken leg, primetime game against Notre Dame, a very proud program that, you can make, I wouldn't say excuses, reasons as to why he didn't perform, and, maybe talk yourself into, okay, with a more favorable situation, they should be better off. But that being said, I don't know if I have that same hope in the long-term output of what Texas A&M can look like moving forward. Now, I could definitely be wrong there. For whatever it's worth, Le'Veon Moss was a big-time contributor for them when they did have their touchdown drive. It was the offensive line, and it was Moss that really got it done for them. Wegman wasn't really a part of it, which is what also kind of skeeves me out a little bit about him. But you should be able to have a pretty good run game, all things considered. When you get there, Connor Wegman can also contribute to that to some extent, but it's through the air where he's going to need to get better, because 12 of 30 is just never going to cut it as a Power 4 program. So ultimately, again, I think that both teams have a lot to sort of move forward from here, but ultimately, two good defenses facing off. Sometimes you're going to get slugfests. That's what football is about at times, even though obviously a lot of people tend to more lean so towards the offense. I think both of these teams deserve a lot of credit for the performances that they gave on the defensive end. But let me know what your takeaways were as we are going to go into the remainder of the results from week one's action over the weekend. So we are going to be diving into all of that. But first, we're going to be taking a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as we just talked about the headliner games of LSU versus USC and Notre Dame versus Texas A&M. But, of course, so much more action that we have to dive into, so we're going to be just looking across the country as to what some of those big results were. And I want to start with the of course, noon game that a lot of people thought could be one of those headliner-type games as well, but obviously did not turn out to be that way, as Georgia versus Clemson got really ugly really fast. Now, this was a 6-0 game at halftime, so I don't want to make it out to be that Georgia start to finish just, cleaned up on Clemson, because that was not the case. Clemson still does have a very nice defense, and there were, some things to feel optimistic about moving forward with Clemson, I suppose, from a defensive perspective. Number 11, the defensive tackle, Peter Woods, he was sort of all over the place making plays for them, and somebody that they, obviously Clemson, a program that really fixates on the idea of development within house and all of those things, that, that's something that they should feel good about. But that being said, should start to further consider this idea, and I don't want to harp on it too much because everybody already is, but the idea of whether or not it is harming, how much it is harming Clemson, their lack of using the transfer portal, because it definitely made a difference in this game. And to be fair, Georgia isn't a team that is very transfer reliant either. They're a sort of proud program in terms of doing it a little bit more the traditional way of high school recruiting, developing within, all that, which is 100% fair. But that being said, sometimes you just need a little bit of an extra push, and just allocating some of your attention to the transfer portal can be worthwhile, which was shown in this game where Logan Humphreys, a transfer from Vanderbilt, I believe it was, one of 11 transfers for Georgia, ended up having a pretty impactful game where he scored a 40-yard touchdown, ultimately 63 yards. It's not like he had anything crazy, but two big-time catches for Georgia that sort of helped ignite the offense a little bit. And ultimately, Georgia's offense, again, it was a slow start. I thought that Carson Beck was just a step off early on, and ultimately really good stats for Beck as a whole: 22 of 33, 278 yards, 2 touchdowns. So you feel pretty good about what Beck gives. You just know that he can also give you more. Also, for whatever it's worth, Georgia missing their top 2 running backs in this game. Nate Frazier did play pretty well for them, 83 yards and a touchdown for him, so showing a little bit of depth / somebody who could be next up for the Georgia Bulldogs, but they should get their starters back within the next couple weeks, and ultimately I think that we're really going to start to see Georgia, if we haven't already, with a 34-3 win against a good program in Clemson, but really show that they are deserving of that number 1 spot, which I would most certainly agree with. As for Clemson here, again, I don't want to bury them too much because I'm sure all of the overreactions this week are going to be about how Clemson is no longer the Clemson they were in the mid-2010s, which they are not that, 100%. It's just a matter of, are they dead or are they having a little bit of an identity crisis? And I don't think that I'm fully ready to bury them. They needed Cade Klubnik to sort of take that next step if they were ever going to be competitive in this game, and he really struggled. 18 of 29, 142 yards, 1 interception, was struggling with accuracy all day. And I think that that's just an issue that they're going to have to correct, the lack of, they do actually have some decent weapons in Antonio Williams and Jake Brenningstool, so it's not like they have nothing. They 100% need better quarterback play, though. And ultimately, again, the defense could only hold off Georgia so long without any sort of help on their own. But the ACC would have been basically entirely written for dead by a lot of the overreactionists if it weren't for the fact that Miami came through in a huge way in their game against Florida to be able to, again, not hold off the ACC is dead arguments, because they went in and they absolutely dominated Florida. And that was sort of, overreactions wise, we can tend to bury teams earlier. We can, also anoint teams too early. That being said, I think that Florida was under the radar already headed into this season. That 19 was disrespectfully low, and you're playing Florida, who is thought to be taking steps in the right direction as a program, but still we know, not one of those elite SEC programs. But the ACC also saw Virginia Tech lose to Vanderbilt, where Vanderbilt was projected to be last in the SEC. Virginia Tech 4th in the preseason polls in the ACC. So, obviously they were going to need a big win no matter who it was against an out-of-conference opponent, which I know those conversations can be sort of picked off a little bit in an unfair way. But I wish I had put money on this game, because 2.5 from the jump seemed like that was not giving Miami enough credit, and they just ran away with it, with Cam Ward really impressing, somebody that was very, very good at Washington State last year, was in that Heisman candidacy for a while, and I just don't know if the casual college football fan was really keeping up with everything that Cam Ward was doing, because he's special and he's just got all the swagger to him, where you see him drop back and he just looks so cool, calm, and collected. I think the word that they used on the broadcast for him was nonchalant, and it was so accurate, where, then he's scrambling, he's breaking off deceptively quick, just like a skinnier, little bit of a lankier guy. I didn't expect him to, so even myself, maybe I was underrating him, but I didn't expect him to move the way that he did, and it's not like he only had 3 rush attempts, but, he was effective on them, and he was just sort of coasting out of bounds, talking a little bit of smack. The touchdown throw that he had towards the end of the first half, rolling to his left and then finding a man in the back of the end zone. It was Jacoby George in the back of the end zone, throwing across his body. It was so impressive, and this is why I picked Miami to come out of the ACC. Now, obviously, can't get too carried away with all of this excitement. This is a Florida team that now you look on the other side, and there could be some jobs that are a little bit on the hot seat a little bit, where now you look at the way that this sort of played out, and with Billy Napier, could he be on the hot seat this season? It's definitely a conversation now. So ultimately, this was a very convincing performance from Miami, and again, a team that I have a lot of confidence in moving forward with this season. I don't think that this was just a fluke, but what an introduction for Cam Ward and this Miami offense. By the way, just also give Xavier Restrepo some credit as well for what was one of the cleanest spin moves I feel like I've seen, like, actually in a game, used to perfection. Had two Florida Gators defenders running into each other, and he ends up breaking it off. He had a huge game, 7 receptions, 112 yards, 1 touchdown. So wanted to give him a little bit of love as well. But couple other notes here. We'll go to the Big Ten. Penn State with a very convincing win as well. I know we just talked about Notre Dame, and Miami, to be fair, is another one of those teams, even going back to last year, that can get some hype and some expectations through the first couple weeks and then ultimately fall short. Penn State is probably one of those programs as well that feel a little bit off about them. But that being said, I mean, I thought that was as convincing of a win as they really could have asked for in week 1, going into West Virginia's territory and being able to pull out that game, especially with some of the adversity in terms of the weather delay, 2-hour weather delay at halftime. Honestly, might have favored Penn State, to be fair, and take the crowd out of it a little bit. But I mean, either way, that was not an easy win for Penn State, or it shouldn't have been. They just made it that way, and they did so by, sure, dominating the offensive line, great defense. Those are sort of the expecteds, but it was the introduction of Andy Kotelnicki's deep game and Drew Aller being able to show out a little bit more for whatever it's worth. It's not like he was asked to throw a ton of passes or, have an incredibly high volume of passes, where he only threw 17 passes, 11 of 17, 216 yards, 3 touchdowns. He was excellent for when he was in. This is somebody that a lot of people sort of abandoned last year as well because of the struggles with Penn State's offense, but there is more of, some of the, again, Andy Kotelnicki, he is somebody with a reputation to, be able to dial up some more things downfield. Looks like Harrison Wallace could emerge as a true number 1 target, 5 catches, 117 yards, 2 touchdowns in this game. And then the fact as well, obviously, this is mostly about the passing for Penn State, but Nicholas Singleton as well, after a disappointing sophomore season, opens up with against a pretty good defense in West Virginia, 13 carries, 114 yards, and a touchdown. So I thought that overall Penn State was very impressive, and I'm not going to allow myself to, fully plant my flag on, Penn State's going to surprise people this year, but they definitely have a chance to be a lot better. And I know people are going to be sketched out about it because of the fact that it is Penn State and they have fallen short offensively in years past, but I thought it was a very impressive performance. And then the last couple notes here, Oregon and Michigan, both teams a little bit closer calls than they were anticipating early on. Oregon wins 24-14 against Idaho. This was a 3-point game in the fourth quarter, which was absolutely crazy. I think that, a lot of people are trying to pin this on Dylan Gabriel, and at least online I saw people trying to pin it on Gabriel, say, oh, well, you guys overhyped him so much during the offseason. I thought Dylan Gabriel was excellent in this game, and obviously, you go into, and the box scores can often be deceiving when you see big stats and ultimately not that many points, but that wasn't the case for Dylan Gabriel, where I thought he was incredibly accurate, decision making was great all game long, but penalties definitely got in the way of some of Oregon's drives, and they just kind of kept shooting themselves in the foot on a lot of these. But friggin' Dylan Gabriel, 41 of 49, 380 yards and 2 touchdowns. He was very, very impressive to me, and I'm not worried about Oregon really. I think they'll be able to, they just have some stuff to clean up. They are far from the only team that has some stuff to clean up in terms of penalties and execution and stuff like that. But I think they're going to be fine. And then Michigan, who we're going to come back around to later in the show as well, they ultimately win by 20 points in this game. It was close for a lot of it. Ultimately, it took a Will Johnson pick six with a few minutes left in the fourth quarter to really put a dagger on this game. But a lot of conversations in terms of the quarterback controversy. They pull a little bit of a surprise. I think it was a surprise to me. I think that it was a surprise to a lot of people, the fact that Alex Orji did not end up being the starting quarterback for them. Instead, they decided to go with Davis Warren. Orji, I mean, it was such a surprise that the broadcast crew, when they put the starting lineups up, they had Alex Orji as the quarterback. Instead, it was Warren who won the job during training camp. We saw some of the shortcomings in limited attempts from Orji as a passer, but that's something that we're going to, again, talk a little bit more about at the end of the show. But for now, we are going to be taking a quick break, and when we come back on the other side, I want to talk about some of the performances of younger quarterbacks making their first starts in college football this past weekend, and about what the future of the position and of the sport ultimately look like. So we are going to be diving into that, but first, a quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, as I now want to take a look into some of the young quarterbacks that got playing time this past weekend in college football, where we sort of are now starting to get a look at what are these next slate of quarterbacks. I don't feel like it's extremely a strong class in terms of some of the upperclassmen. Got some good names out there, but thought we saw a lot of promise, granted against weaker competition, but some guys who can really sling the ball and could be in Heisman conversations in years to come. So I want to start off by talking about some of the guys. We're going to go a little bit quick here because we broke down the USC and LSU game earlier in the show. But Miller Moss and Garrett Nussmeier facing off against one another, against some good competition, I will add. And I thought they were both very impressive. Starting with Miller Moss here, the drives that he was able to put together at the end of both halves, very impressive. I thought that he did a really good job of being able to maneuver some of the pressure that was applied from that LSU front seven, making throws on the run with guys in his face. The accuracy just really stood out to me as something that is desirable moving forward here. And additionally, with the fact that there really weren't all that many explosive plays for USC's offense, LSU made them earn it for the most part. And he was just able to do a very good job dissecting everything. And I thought it was a great first impression for somebody that has very big shoes to, fill in after Caleb Williams heads to the NFL. Miller Moss did just about everything that he could have in week one to show that he is at least a capable replacement and could be a great one. On the other side, Garrett Nussmeier, and you want to talk about big shoes to fill, same can be said for him, replacing Jaden Daniels, who won the Heisman just last season. thought that he did a very good job as well. I mean, him and Moss were dueling the entire night, and I'll start by saying the interception, not on him. I don't hold it against him whatsoever. It was right at the end of the game on that final drive where it was pretty much over anyways. So I think that you just got to look at the passing yards, the touchdowns. I mean, he was able to settle in, I thought, very quickly. What stood out to me about Nussmeier was the maturity at the line of scrimmage, making, pre-snap reads, and was just able to very comfortably sort of work through progressions. I thought the mental game with Nussmeier was very impressive. Add to that the fact that he made the throws too. It's one thing if you can just process it and not actually get results. That's when you end up being a coach. But Nussmeier's definitely a player and somebody that LSU has high expectations for moving forward, and I think deservingly so, that he is able to, I thought the play calling was a little bit iffy at times for LSU. Some drives that definitely stalled out through the passing game, abandoned the run maybe a little bit more than they should have, but Nussmeier also was very good. Jackson Arnold was one of the most talented throwers of the football that I watched all week. Now, he was going up against Temple, so there's only so much you can say to that. We didn't get that many opportunities, but when you're just talking about how pretty that deep ball looks with him, I was sort of blown away from it, where he was efficient in his attempts, at least 17 of 25, 141 yards, but the 4 touchdowns is what I'm looking at. He just got damage done. He's athletic as well, can move the ball with his legs as well, and overall, I think that when you're wearing an Oklahoma jersey as well, there is a lot of pressure to live up to, given the, extensive history of great quarterbacks that have played the position for Oklahoma. Jackson Arnold, I'm not going to, solidify that he is already that, but I think he has a very bright future in front of him, and I will definitely be excited to see how he is able to how he's able to hold up against some more meaningful competition. Again, we're getting into the area where a lot of these guys weren't playing all that great of competition, but Nico Iamaleava as well, Tennessee freshman quarterback, came in and they gave him a good amount of runway as Tennessee ended up rolling over Chattanooga, but it seemed like to me that they were actually trying to let him still get some of these, working bumps out of the way, and they just kind of never came for Nico, who was just dicing up Chattanooga all the way through. 22 of 28, 314 yards and 3 touchdowns. This is one of the more highly hyped up incoming quarterbacks for the next handful of years. We'll be seeing him ideally for another 3 seasons, and again, another one with Nico where I just thought that the arm talent was so obvious jumping off the screen that he is somebody who, again, should continue to develop, and we're going to have to sort of wait to see what that outstanding quality about him is. But again, arm talent I think is absolutely there, and somebody that I'm definitely looking forward to seeing in years to come here. Dylan Raiola of Nebraska, maybe a little bit more under the radar given the fact that Nebraska is not a ranked team, that Nebraska, frankly, has been Nebraska these past handful of years, but I'm definitely bought into them in general just with the idea of Matt Rule. For college football fans, I'm sure they are very familiar with him. NFL fans and college football fans probably have very different ideas of who he is as a coach. He is a program builder. We saw that a couple times with Temple and with Baylor as he was coming up the coaching ranks. gets put in a not great situation already in Carolina and didn't do himself any favors either, the way that he sort of handled the quarterback competition there. So a very quick tenure in the NFL, but back at college at a program that has history in Nebraska and could definitely be competitive if they have the right leader. And Matt Rule might be capable of that as a program builder, and Dylan Raiola might be that as a quarterback, where, I just thought that he looked so poised and comfortable in this game for Nebraska, playing UTEP. So, again, I keep saying it, competition-wise, meh. But I thought that, the poise is what really stood out to me more than anything. And he absolutely has the arm strength as well, the accuracy, all of those things to go with it. But he just looks like somebody who can lead a football team with his general approach. I like his size. I like how comfortably he sort of uses that to be able to stand in the pocket and make throws a little bit under pressure. That overall, Nebraska's a team that I'm definitely keeping an eye on this upcoming season, and Dylan Raiola definitely passed the eye test for me in this week 1 matchup. So we have one more graphic here for our video viewers, but before we do that, I did sort of leave out Connor Wegman out of this group as well. I do think that he technically would sort of fit into this category as well, and he's somebody who's going to be important and impactful to this current season. And for those of you who didn't check out our breakdown of Notre Dame and Texas A&M, Wegman was 12 of 30, 100 yards, 0 touchdowns, 2 interceptions. He really struggled in this game, and ultimately, all of it was just kind of messy as a whole. The accuracy wasn't there. I thought the footwork was really clunky when he was throwing under pressure. He sort of forced himself into being a little bit more off-platform, but this is somebody that ultimately, in Wegman, I don't know. He was a former number 1 recruit at the quarterback position, so what I said earlier is that if you already have stock in Wegman, I'm not telling you to sell it all. Based off of this game, he definitely didn't win anybody over with this performance, but if you're a believer in Wegman, I don't know if I've seen enough of his previous footage to really tell you whether or not I'm a long-term believer here. He is still technically a sophomore after missing the majority of last season. Somebody to keep an eye on, not feeling great about it at this moment, and we'll see whether or not the pressure continues to build for him for a Texas A&M program that just hired Mike Elko to be the head coach, and they are hoping for more results. Elko, obviously, defensive-minded coach, but they're going to need options there on the offensive side as well, and that's what most certainly not what they got on Saturday. But last quarterback I did want to dip into here a little bit, course, just had to throw him in there, was Arch Manning. There's really not a ton to analyze with him here, where this was a blowout game against Colorado State. Obviously, Quinn Ewers started the game. Arch just got his shine because Texas was beating the doors off of Colorado State. But Arch, 5 of 6, 95 passing yards, 2 total touchdowns, 1 rushing, 1 passing. The playmaking skills from him, for whatever it's worth, the scramble out to his right, just about at the line of scrimmage, kicks it out to a player for a little shovel touchdown pass. I thought that was very impressive, and just the overall mobility with him was more than I was anticipating. Again, not sure how much you can really take out of this game, but that was the most that we've gotten to see Arch Manning yet in college football, and we're going to be getting a whole lot more of it by the start of next season. So, definitely a TBD out there on Arch Manning, but let me know what your thoughts were, what other quarterbacks you were particularly impressed by in week 1, but we are now going to be taking our final break, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to be diving into the biggest questions that we still have remaining now that the weekend is just about over. So we're going to be diving into that. First, quick break. Do not go anywhere. We will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the day, where we're just going to be breaking down some of the biggest remaining questions in college football following week 1. Again, not entirely over with, because we do still have Florida State versus Boston College tonight. But outside of that, all of the big results for college football week 1 are in the books, and I want to talk about some of the remaining questions and just mention Florida State. Is the ACC in trouble? This is a little bit of a make or break season for the ACC. Last year, having an undefeated conference champion miss the playoffs definitely rubbed some of the ACC programs the wrong way, mostly Florida State and their whole legal disputes with the conference during the offseason. But Florida State also didn't do themselves any favors with their week 0 loss, so we'll see what happens for them tonight against Boston College. But we've seen 3 of the top 4 contenders in the conference already lose. It was, like I mentioned, that Florida State lost to Georgia Tech, Clemson's lost to Georgia, and Virginia Tech losing to Vanderbilt. And again, these are 3 of the top 4 teams in the ACC preseason polls, and you're losing to, Clemson. Clemson, the issue is how they lost as well, and we're going to be diving a little bit more specifically into Clemson as well. But, them getting blown out, and then FSU and Virginia Tech both losing to inferior competition, that is not a good sign for the conference. I think it would be huge for them to be able to have 2 playoff teams. I talked about this headed into the season. I think the way that happens, the most realistic path for it, is that Florida State, who sort of had the most expectations coming into the season, if they have a very good year for themselves and end up losing to a team like Miami that I think is a true contender, ending up losing to a team like that in the conference championship. Now, Florida State still has a ton of time to rectify that Georgia Tech loss, but that is a brutal blow for them. Clemson, like I mentioned, it's not just that they lost, because Georgia at a neutral site, by the way, not sure how Atlanta is neutral site for the Georgia Bulldogs, but I digress there. But them losing in horrific fashion, and also, for whatever it's worth as well, them losing with their offense not really showing up for them, which was more so the question with Clemson headed into the season. So the ACC seeming to be in trouble. Miami doing their best job to sort of put the conference on their backs, but this was a very rough start for the ACC, and I think it's going to be really hard for them to overcome, which sort of, again, all of this leading into the idea of, is the ACC in trouble? In order to fully answer that question, I think you have to ask, what kind of a program is Clemson going to be moving forward? Where this is a program that has been gradually losing their ground over these past handful of years. They were a juggernaut towards the end of the 2010s, and since then have really struggled to regain their footing post Trevor Lawrence. And Cade Klubnik was, well, even before that, it was DJ Uiagalelei. He never worked out for them. Cade Klubnik showed a little bit of flash leading into the starting job, but he is yet to sort of meet the expectations that were bestowed upon him. And Clemson, again, the fact that there is this massive sort of storyline hovering around them about the lack of using the transfer portal, it hurts, because you then see players like Torian Pride Jr. going and making an impact with Missouri in week 1, and you see Bo Collins emerging a little bit for Notre Dame. So they're just losing out on their players. Meanwhile, they're not actually bringing anybody back. 0 transfers on their roster this season. The only non-service-based FBS school to have 0 transfers. And that's something that, again, it becomes a pretty heated debate as to whether or not, I mean, I think most people would say at this point that Clemson needs to pick up the pace in terms of that aspect of the game. Is Dabo Swinney willing to dive into that as well? Is he okay with sort of abandoning tradition? And not to say that Clemson's put in no effort, it just hasn't really worked out for them in the transfer portal up to this point. And it seems like there needs to be a more extreme emphasis on it. Now, as for Clemson with this game, I don't think that I'm going to entirely rule them out for the season just yet. That this was a very difficult week 1 matchup. I have a hard time sometimes. I can be a little bit fluid with it, but if you're scheduling really difficult opponents early on in the season, especially week 1, I will tend to give you a little bit more of the benefit of the doubt, because we know that the teams that we saw this past weekend will not be the same versions of the team that we see at the end of the season. So I can give Clemson a little bit of wiggle room there. But again, didn't answer any of our questions offensively. And to be honest, again, I don't like ruling out teams early, but I wasn't high on Clemson going into the season. This is a disaster, feels like an exaggeration again, especially because they played Georgia, but this was a concerning loss. Now, to what degree, that's up to you. Let us know what your thoughts are in the comment section. But I do think that the ACC is in a fair, shape of trouble here, because that we also saw UNC lose their quarterback, Max Johnson, for the entire season following the injury in Thursday night's game. SMU wasn't exactly impressive in week 0 against Nevada. So you're talking about a conference that the hope, in order to just retain your premier programs, was try and get 2 teams into the playoffs, and feels like it's going to be an uphill battle for that to be the case. Very quickly here, I'll talk about was Saturday night's game against Notre Dame and Texas A&M more about the bad offense or good defense? We did talk about this a little bit at length earlier on in the show. So if you're watching us on YouTube right now and you missed that, definitely be sure to check out that video. But I think that ultimately I have more confidence in the upside of Notre Dame's defense. These are 2 very impressive defenses between Notre Dame and Texas A&M. I think that this was a tougher matchup for Notre Dame in terms of having an inexperienced offensive line going into a rowdy situation at College Station, visiting Texas A&M against that defense. I just feel like eventually they're going to be able to grow a little bit more cohesion on that offensive line. The big thing for Notre Dame is, can they add a passing game, on top of what should be a very good rushing attack that I'm confident in moving forward this season. So I think that Notre Dame is going to, be okay. But Texas A&M, I have more concerns with. They have a new offensive coordinator in Colin Klein. They have a new, head coach more on the defensive side, of course, with Mike Elko. That a lot of turnover from last season to this. But I'll say this, I don't know how much easier things are going to get for A&M. They won't have to face Notre Dame every week, but they were sort of the ones that were supposed to have a little bit more of an upper hand, I feel like, in this game, and ultimately the offense just never came through for them. Connor Wegman looked pretty poor throughout the night, and somebody that we already said it multiple times on this show. If you have stock in him, then good for you. Wegman was not buying over anybody with that performance, and he has a whole lot more to prove before, we can really start putting him in the conversation of some of these other young star quarterbacks that we're seeing emerging in college football. So we'll see there. I want to talk about Michigan as well. What is the answer for them moving forward at the quarterback position? Because they decided to almost, I don't know how last minute it was, or at least to the media they didn't really let it out all that much, that they are moving forward with Davis Warren as the starting quarterback for the team, as opposed to Alex Orji, which I think generally speaking, I can understand, because Warren does provide a lot more is maybe a bit of a hyperbole there, but he provides more passing upside than Alex Orji does 100%. Orji, it kind of seemed like, just based off of the fact that he has actually gotten snaps with this Michigan team before, that he's been here for a bit, that was going to, sort of help win him the job, but guess he didn't make the progressions that he needed to. That being said, Davis Warren, 15 of 25, 118 yards, 1 touchdown, 1 interception. This was not in a very impressive offensive performance from Michigan. Now, new quarterback, new head coach, new offensive coordinator, entirely new offensive line. You lose your top 2 receivers as well. There are a lot of new things in this offense that definitely, make a difference in regards to, it's going to take some time to piece this whole thing together for Michigan. That's why they were ranked, below a Penn State in the preseason poll. And I don't hear too many people in the media screaming for, Michigan is severely underrated. They have a whole lot to prove before we can get there. Davis Warren, is he the answer? I'm not sold on it. But that being said, we got 2 pass attempts from Orji. One of them, a little play-action rollout where he hits a wide-open man, and then the other one being him throwing it 6 feet into the dirt, 6 feet in front of the intended receiver. He was off by a lot. So I don't know if maybe we are going to see Alex Orji take on a bigger role this year. I mean, he got his fair share of snaps, I suppose, that he's going to provide different looks. Michigan hasn't shied away from a 2-quarterback approach in years past, but I don't know if they necessarily have the answer currently on the staff. And that being said, it's not just them. Like I mentioned, the receivers were pretty non-existent in this game, outside of tight end Colston Loveland, who is, going to be, especially given his surrounding circumstances this year, could work his way into being a first-round tight end in the 2025 NFL draft, but they're going to need production outside of him, because Loveland, 8 catches, 87 yards, and a touchdown. That is half of the completions. It is over half of the total yards from Michigan Michigan receiving core, 121 yards, and obviously one of those touchdowns. So ultimately, I mean, we'll have to see. I think the Michigan is, again, a little bit more of a long-term product at this point, now under Sharon Moore, having so much turnover to overcome. But let me know what your thoughts are in terms of that quarterback position. Do they stick it out with Warner, or do you think that Orji should get a bigger chance? But that is all the time we have for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content, and we will be back tomorrow afternoon at 2 o'clock p.m. Eastern. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn, ain't that great.